Hello viewers, welcome to this video. Right, this video is slightly off topic to my usual videos in my channel. So many people were asking me about the type of operating system that I use and how I customize my operating system and so on. So I thought of sharing my journey through different operating systems, the type of operating systems that I've used in the past, I'm currently using, and what's my favorite and so on. So those sort of discussions. So I always wanted to do this video, but I never had time to do that. Alright, so let's start. Okay, so when did my journey start with the operating system, with using computers? That was back like 25 years ago when I was doing my high school. Basically I started using Windows. So the first operating system I tried was Windows 98, back in the floppy disk days. So I remember using 3.5-inch floppy disk. So if you've used floppy disk, you might remember this number here, 1.44 meg. So those were the days of kilobytes and megabytes, right? So that's the storage space that you've got in a 3.5-inch floppy disk. So I remember copying games, photos, and things like that, files, documents, and so on in floppy disk, and along with that some virus as well. So if you just insert a certain floppy disk, your computer won't boot and so on. So those floppy disk days, which I can't forget. So basically I started with Windows 98, and then I tried Windows Millennium Edition for a short while, and I've been using Windows XP for a long time, and then tried Windows Vista and Windows 7, but Windows 10 very recently, but not most of the time. So I think of all these Windows editions, the longer I've stayed with is with Windows 7. Okay, so that's enough about Windows, because I'm not a Windows person, you all know that. I'm a Linux person. So my journey with Linux started about 20 years ago, when back in 2000, I guess. Okay, my first Linux distribution was Knoppix. Using a Knoppix live CD, I booted off my computer, and I don't know how to install Linux, so I just used the operating system from the CD. Obviously, you won't be able to write anything, but that's my first experience with Linux. I think it's Knoppix 3 dot something, I'm not sure. I think Knoppix is still around as a live CD if you want to do some operating system hard disk kind of operations, and you can boot you can basically use that as a recovery OS, log into that live CD and then do some disk operations and so on. Yeah, so that was my first Linux distribution. My adventure into Linux started with Knoppix and then into Ubuntu, no surprise. And so the first version that I used was Ubuntu 9.10, which is Karmic Cola. And then I used Fedora, various versions of Fedora, 24, 25, 26, 28. I can't remember, I've used most of them. And more recently, version 32 for a very short while. And Ubuntu 16, 18, 20. So I've been switching between Fedora and Ubuntu for a long time. And that's when I decided to change my thinking, and I was more towards a lightweight and minimalistic approach. So what I don't want is, if you go for Fedora or Ubuntu, there's lots and lots of things that comes with the operating system, which 90% of the time you won't use it. So I started looking at options for distribution that's very lightweight, customizable, just has things that you need, absolute minimal operating system. So I started with Crunchbang, which is a Debian based and comes with OpenBox window manager. You know, basically going from Fedora and Ubuntu, a full-blown distribution, to something like very minimalistic distribution. Then the lot of customization that you tend to do, it takes a lot of time. So Crunchbang, and then I switched to Archbang, which is Arch Linux based. Again, it uses OpenBox window manager, and those are the things that I started when I started looking for a minimalistic approach. And then I made my jump into Arch Linux, and I still love Arch Linux. So basically I chose Archbang instead of Arch Linux because I didn't know how to I knew how to install Arch Linux, but there were so many problems with wireless getting the drivers working, touchscreen, touchpad, and all sorts of things, and the amount of time it takes to install Arch Linux, reading through the documentation, watching videos, and so on. So that's why I chose Archbang first before moving to Arch Linux. And then I learned more about the Arch Linux, and then I got quite comfortable with Arch Linux. I'd been with Arch Linux for so long. I really loved it. So it comes with very minimal core set of programs that you need, and then on top of it you build your own distribution, your own system environment. It's like building your own house. So you lay the foundation, and then you just put different modules into it as per your liking. So very lightweight. I liked Arch Linux. And then I switched to Manjaro GNOME edition, which is again Arch based. The reason I switched to Manjaro is because I'll tell you later why I do this, but I do distro hopping every now and then. So it takes a lot of time to install Arch Linux, and it's a pain. Although you know how to install, I've documented how to install Arch Linux and everything, but every time I distro hop, I reinstall operating systems every now and then, so that's too time consuming for me. So I switched to Manjaro. Okay, so that's Arch based, and I've used Manjaro GNOME distribution, GNOME edition. And recently, few years ago, I've tried Gentoo in my laptop. The only distribution I loved so much was Gentoo, but I'm not in Gentoo at the moment. I'll tell you why. But that's the distribution that I loved so much. If you want to learn Linux, go for Gentoo, but you need to have patience. All right. So, for example, the way it works is the thing I like about Gentoo is the customizability. It's very minimal. When I say minimal, Arch Linux is minimal, but Gentoo is extremely minimal. Even down to the packages that you install, you can select the options for the packages using used flags. So you can choose certain settings, certain modules to be installed in each packages, and so on, using used flags. So that's highly customizable, and I really enjoyed configuring the kernel myself. And from start to finish to a completely workable desktop environment, initially it took about 3 or 4 days, and then I got more used and more comfortable with Gentoo, and like in about 10 hours I'll get everything set up in Gentoo. Those 10 hours are for the compiling time. So everything that you install in Gentoo is going to take a lot of time for compilation, especially if you go for bigger softwares like LibreOffice, Qt Web Engine, LLVM. What else? There are a few things that Qt Web Engine, that's the one, because I use a Qt browser. I don't use Chrome, or I don't use Firefox or anything. The browser I use is this one, Qt browser. So that one is a Python-based web browser. It requires Qt Web Engine. So in order to compile Qt Web Engine, it took, I think it took about 8 hours to compile Qt Web Engine, even in my 8-core Linux laptop. But you can tweak settings like the number of parallel threads that you use during the compilation, and then you can bring the compilation time down. But still, if you want to use Gentoo, you need to have patience. And every single package you install is going to be compiled on your machine. So that's going to be hard on your machine, but once you install it, it's very efficient, and it runs smoothly. So I really like Gentoo, and once in a while, if you're doing a full system upgrade and there are lots of packages, what I'll normally do is I'll start the upgrade before going to bed, and then it will be ready by the next day morning. So that's the amount of time it takes for full compilation of all the things that you need. So I tend to keep things very minimal. I don't go for a graphical environment. For example, any applications, for example, if you go for an IRC chat, you can use HexChat, LimeChat, and so on, but I don't go for the GUI version. I use the terminal version like VChat, IRSSI, and so on. So I tend to, even the email client, Now I'm in a GNOME distribution, so I use Thunderbird, but when I was in Gentoo, I didn't use Thunderbird or any graphical email client. So what I used was NeoMut. So because of the time it takes to compile everything, I tend to keep my packages very minimal, so that it doesn't take too much of a time. But the real fun is compiling the kernel. You tend to learn so much about Linux when you're using Gentoo. So I recommend you to at least try Gentoo, but make sure you've got enough time to do that. Don't lose your patience. It'll be hard, very hard to try first, but you will learn. Their wiki documentation is absolutely great, so you can find things, and I would advise you to jump into the Gentoo IRC chat. There are a few guys there, really very helpful. Whenever I get stuck with something in Gentoo, usually the problem will be dependencies. When you're compiling packages, there might be some dependencies and so on. So the guys in Gentoo, I find them very, very helpful, very friendly. Even if you don't know anything, they will be ready to help you. Okay, so you will be learning a whole lot of things about Linux when you're using Gentoo. But that's again time consuming, right? So absolute minimum operating system, I would go for either Arch Linux or Gentoo. So my preference is Gentoo if you've got time and patience, or Arch Linux. Okay, so what else? So what I'm running at the moment is Ubuntu 20.04 GNOME edition, not the Ubuntu KDE or LXDE or anything. It's pure GNOME. That's the one I'm using. The reason I switched from Arch Linux and Gentoo to Ubuntu is nowadays I'm not getting enough time. I've spent sleepless nights out of curiosity, out of interest. If you give me a laptop and a Gentoo ISO to try out, I can sit all night without sleeping for a week, even trying things out, customizing to my liking, because I like everything to be very perfect. If there's something that's slightly out of control or out of interest, then I won't be quite satisfied with the way it looks. So I tend to customize very much. So I realized that I've been spending too much time in the customizations and things. Although the good thing about this, I'm learning a lot. I really enjoy doing this. I'm not spending time with my family. So I'm very much guilty of not being able to spend too much time with my family. I love to do all these things, but still it takes up a lot of my personal time. And then I decided, no, I have tried enough of Arch Linux and Gentoo. I really love it. I want to go back to my bachelor days, but if there's any option I can, but there's no option. Alright, so that's why now I'm back to Ubuntu. So whatever operating system I try, what I normally do is I just install a plain vanilla version of the operating system, and then every single customization I do, I'll just record it. I mean, either as a script or as an Ansible playbook. So when it comes to installing the operating system again at some point in the future, I'll just install the operating system and then run my Ansible playbook. That will set up everything. So the first time when I'm building my Ansible playbook according to my customization, it will take me about a couple days, every single customization. Then I keep adding stuff to that Ansible playbook, but that will help me save some time in the future when I have to reinstall the operating system. Okay, enough about the operating system. Now going to the desktop and window manager. So what I use, I've used all these GNOME 2, GNOME 3 recently, XFCE, KDE, LXDE, and i3 tiling window manager. Which is my favorite? i3, always i3. Okay, let me talk about some of the things that I like and don't like about each of these. So if you take GNOME for example, GNOME 2, the very old version, when I started the GNOME environment, for example the Ubuntu 1 where they were using Unity, but GNOME 2, very old school way. But GNOME 3, I started liking more GNOME 3 because of its elegance, simplicity, clutter-free. The desktop looks really clean, minimal and everything. But when it comes to performance, I really don't like GNOME 3. It's not very performant. It hogs CPU, memory, and sorry, it uses more CPU, more memory. The GNOME shell constantly, whatever it does in the background, it constantly uses so much of CPU. Although I've got a powerful notebook here, Dell XPS 13. It's got 8 core and let me see my system. So it's got 16 gig of memory. I shouldn't be worrying about the memory. I shouldn't be worrying about the processing power or anything because I've got 8 core i7, 16 gig NVMe SATA hard disk, SSD, I'm sorry, disk capacity, 512 gig and everything, but I shouldn't be worrying too much about it. But still, you know, if I'm not doing anything in the operating system, I just logged into my operating system, I'm not doing actually anything, but still GNOME consumes about 1.5 to 1.6 gig of memory, and it's constantly using like 10 to 15% of my CPU, which I really don't like about. So when I was in Gentoo, an i3 tiling window manager, once I log in and if I don't do anything, absolutely the system will be idle. It won't be doing anything, but in GNOME, my CPU fan, processor fan will be always running. All right, so that's the thing about the GNOME. But one thing I need to mention, the latest version of GNOME 3.36, I really love it, which is what I'm currently running with the latest version of Ubuntu. It's very snappy. It uses less CPU, but memory wise I don't really care. It still uses 1.5, 1.6, 1.7 gig when it starts up, but that's not a big issue. The CPU usage has come down. It's very snappy, looks good. So that's about GNOME. And if I were to choose one of the desktop environments, I would be choosing GNOME 3 for sure. So XFCE, I've used XFCE. I like it for its functionality. If you're a person who doesn't care about the appearance, but just if it works fine, then go for XFCE. It's very stable functionality. It looks very old, but very functional. KDE, I like KDE. I've used KDE for a long time. I like it for its customizability. You can customize too much customization. That's both a pro and a con for me. Too much of customizations. If you go into any applications preferences screen or system, the desktop manager's preference configuration page, settings page, you will see way too much of configuration options and too much of clutter basically. LXDE is again lightweight. If you just care about the functionality but not about the appearance, then LXDE, go for LXDE. Anyways, you can always customize your desktop environment by applying themes and so on, but adding more stuff to the existing things, which I really don't like. I need to use the stock version wherever it's possible. Okay, about i3, the window manager that I like the most. When it comes to customizability, simplicity, minimalistic, I like i3 very much. I haven't tried any other tiling window manager. I feel more productive using i3 window manager than using GNOME or anything, because I'm a keyboard driven person. I use less of mouse when it comes to using the desktop. Only for browsing I use mouse, but even with Qt browser, which is keyboard based browser, I tend to use mouse very less these days. But i3 is completely keyboard driven. Loads of shortcuts that you can customize. Anything that you want can be done using the keys in your keyboard. And there are other tiling window managers like DWM, BSPWM, Xmonad, Spectra, Qtile, Awesome, which I wanted to try. I've got all these in my wish list, but if I've got the luxury of time, I would be happy to try all these. Okay, so in terms of setup, how often do I distro hop? Very often. In fact, in the last 2 weeks, I switched my operating system about 10 times. You wouldn't believe. You might have think that I've gone mad. Yes, I thought myself that I've gone really mad. In the last 2 weeks, I've changed my operating system 10 times. Ubuntu to Manjaro to Arch Linux to Gentoo to Fedora, everything. I will install an operating system and then work, customize everything, and then in couple hours time I'll install it in the morning, and by afternoon I'll get bored of it and I won't be liking something, then I'll then go back to the old version or something. So say for example in this desktop environment, the one thing that's bugging me is this Wi-Fi icon. If you look closely here, the top curve here is not very smooth. So things like that, very minute thing, drives me crazy. Because of this, I'm thinking about, okay, so what should we move to next? So those sort of things. So I'm a distro hopper very often in search of perfection. So how do I maintain my documents if I continuously keep reinstalling my operating system? So that's why I have a data partition. So all my music, videos, photos, documents, everything will be in its own partition, and I will partition my hard disk into different partitions, and sometimes I have a dual operating system in dual boot mode, and whatever operating system I use, I usually mount my data partition once I've installed the operating system and set up the initial user. I also have a backup. I usually have a backup partition to back up my OS partition to using Clonezilla and so on. So I had Gentoo and Arch Linux as dual boot for a long time. So now I've wiped everything. So my hard disk is now only with Ubuntu. So I'm having just a single operating system. I'm not sure how long I'm going to stick with Ubuntu 20 GNOME 3, but I've been in here for the last 32 hours, I think. I don't know how long it's going to last, but that's me. Right, so I think that's all I wanted to share in this video. So hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got any thoughts, or you can share it in comments. Basically, what distros, what distributions you like, what's your favorite about it, do you agree with me in some of these things, or so on. So I'd be really happy if you could share some of your thoughts in the comment section. So in a nutshell, I like Gentoo, I like minimalism, and I like i3. That's it. Alright, see you all in my next video. Bye bye.